Welcome to the Cumbria Chamber of Commerce podcast, your weekly update of business news and issues from around Cumbria. Find out how we support new business and help existing businesses to grow and flourish at cumbriachamber.co.uk. Now here's the Chamber's Business Engagement Manager, Julian Whittle, with this week's episode.
Hello, I'm here with Detective Superintendent Vicki Ellis, Head of the Public Protection Unit at Cumbria Constabulary, to talk about the Force's domestic abuse campaign and in particular the role employers can play. Vicki, employers have a duty of care to their staff, and I think any reasonable, responsible employer would want to help if they thought that an employee was at risk. But to put it into context, how big a problem is domestic abuse in Cumbria? How widespread is it?
I think it would be fair to say that domestic abuse is widespread across the whole of Cumbria County.
Right.
We have about 7,500 incidents every year that equate to about 4,500 crimes. So that takes place across every area in Cumbria.
Yeah.
And what we have started to realise is, whilst it's great for people to come forward and report to the police, the criminal justice route is not always the right outcome for victims. So there's quite a lot of academic research that suggests there's only a significant proportion of cases reported to the police. Others may be reported to support services. So we've got a sort of significant proportion, I think, that isn't reported. So it's a hidden crime. So this initiative for me is about how do we get a community response to domestic abuse, and if there is a proportion reported to support services, there will be victims within business and employees in business that actually suffer the harms of domestic abuse.
Of course, yeah.
So this is about, for me, raising that awareness about having a community response in business and the private sector to this abhorrent crime.
So, when we're talking about domestic abuse, are we talking solely about physical violence, or is there mental or psychological abuse as well? What forms does it take?
It takes a number of forms. So yes, it can be physical violence, and I think our traditional view is of that, domestic violence as we used to term it. But it's more than that, it's abuse. So it can be the emotional, psychological harm, it can be sexual harm, it can be financial harm. And one of the big sort of aspects that we see is that coercion and control. So when people have potentially gained that control through a physical assault or a physical attack, there's a suggestion that they don't need to continually keep physically assaulting or abusing that individual because they've got the control. So this is around, controlling that person, what they do, where they go, what they wear, access to money, and that can be really quite debilitating.
Oh, I see. So again, we tend to think that this is a crime where men are the perpetrators and women are the victims, but that's not always the case, is it?
No, definitely not. And I think there's a real urge from me to identify that men can be victims of domestic abuse. I think we have a traditional view that why doesn't she leave, as in the victim, but I think we need to turn that around and have why doesn't he or she change their behaviour and actually take responsibility for their actions. So yes, men are victims of domestic abuse as well as females.
Now, I think it's often that victims try to hide the signs of abuse from friends and family and work colleagues. So what are the warning signs that employers should be looking out for?
I think it can take a whole host of different forms. There will be people that are absent from work and trying to unpick why that is. Is it as a result of somebody being unwell? Is it because they don't want to come in with some physical injury? Yeah. So absenteeism is a clear thing for me. I think presenteeism is another one. So people that actually don't want to go home, that display levels of nervousness. Yeah. Performance suffers. So whereas they might have been a real competent, capable worker, their performance dips. There may be worry, there may be telltale signs in what they say, or little comments about I can't do this, or I'm prevented from doing that. I think are all telltale signs that if we switch on as employers and as supervisors, managers within a setting, if you start to know your staff truly, and have that one-to-one interaction, you can start to pick up the signs, I think. And certainly people that lose the job, pregnancy is a big trigger factor as well. They're all signs that we want to educate business who come on board and identify DA champions to be able to spot the signs.
I mean, sometimes abusers actually target their victims while they're at work, don't they? Through maybe threatening phone calls or emails. That
Yeah,
sort of thing.
definitely. So I think in the last sort of research I'd pulled together, there's about 76% of people are targeted in the workplace.
Right.
Again, abusive phone calls, waiting outside of the place of work to pick them up. Those are obviously realistic aspects that around that domestic abuse relationship that can be seen in the workplace, and I think there are then steps that the employer and supervisors etc. can take.
Well, that was my next question actually. Because, if an employer suspects that a staff member might be a victim of abuse, what should they do? Because it must be a delicate subject to raise. How should they approach it?
I think it's about us all realising that domestic abuse is an issue. I think we have it as a belief that it shouldn't be tolerated, and I think we should be able to freely talk about it and it not be the hidden issue. So if we are free to talk about it, we can have that dialogue with our staff so that we can start to understand, are they experiencing it, are there any issues? But I think safeguarding is critical for us all. We all have a responsibility for that. So there can be all sorts around changing work numbers, mixing and matching places of work, making sure that there's somebody that actually accompanies that person home, that we make sure they get to the car safely. So there's all sorts of practical steps, as well as signposting some of these victims and people that suffer to support services. So if our staff know what is available out there to offer advice and guidance support to victims, we can direct them to. That's fair enough. That's where, if you like, the abuse has been identified. But I just wondered how an employer should broach the subject with an employee if they suspect, maybe their performance has unexpectedly dipped, or as you gave an example a minute ago, they might be lingering in the office and reluctant to go home, so that the employer is a little bit concerned but doesn't really know what's going on. What's the best way of broaching it with an employee? I think it's about having that honest and supportive dialogue with your staff, being able to actually drill down into what are the issues. So if somebody wants to stay at work all the time, why is that? And trying to understand, it might be that they're keen and conscientious and have got a lot of work. The well-being of staff is crucial. People are our most valuable asset and we need to support them. If they are off from work, again, those return to work interviews, why has that been? If there's a regular period of somebody just being off for an upset stomach, actually trying to understand why is that? Is that because of stress? And trying to understand the dynamic outside, because I think in truly understanding your staff, it's about knowing what their personal setup is as well. And I think in businesses actually raising the awareness and being part of our initiative actually shows that they're a caring business that looks after the welfare of their staff.
I wondered, is it ever the employer's role to go to the police, or should that be entirely the victim's decision to involve you?
We obviously need victims' consent in the majority of cases, but I think if there was and again, it's very difficult to legislate for every eventuality, but there may be cases where there is immediate or a significant threat of harm to an individual. Then I think there is a health and safety and employment and a moral obligation to actually protect that individual. But hopefully what we're looking at is getting the right information out to businesses so that they can show that they're a caring organisation, that we can identify domestic abuse champions that we can train up to spot the signs, to know where to signpost staff. We can then get them that support so that they can then make informed decisions about what they do next.
Now, once you are made aware of an abuse allegation, what can you do?
From a police perspective,
from a police viewpoint, yeah,
we treat every case seriously, and it will be thoroughly investigated. I recognise that sometimes criminal justice is not the right outcome for some victims, but we have got the relevant sort of connections with support services to get them that support that they need, so that they can make the right decisions. But there are also other safeguarding tools that we can use around domestic violence protection notices and orders that give some level of protection around the victim. We can look at Clare's Law disclosure, around the perpetrator if they've previously been an abusive perpetrator in a relationship.
Okay, yeah, this is where when you actually expand on that Clare's Law thing, that's legislation that allows people to check whether somebody's...
So that's the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, also known as Clare's Law, and we welcome applications from members of the public. So there are two routes: right to ask and right to know. So if you start a relationship with somebody, you are well within your rights to ask if that person has been in an abusive relationship, and we review those on a monthly basis. Sometimes there are urgent disclosures that are needed, and we come up with a form of words to give that individual the right information they need to make an informed decision about the future of that relationship.
Okay, now, even if an employer isn't aware of any particular problems in their workplace, there is good practice, if you like, things that a good employer can do, aren't there? I'm thinking of, maybe putting up posters on the back of toilet doors with domestic abuse helpline numbers on. Anything else that you could?
Yeah, I think that's really useful. What I'm encouraging businesses to do at the events that take place at the end of November is to consider having an internal domestic abuse policy and supporting procedure, excuse me, so that they can have it formalised about what their response is. And with that, what we are asking them to do is identify domestic abuse champions and advocates that can get this extra level of training and awareness to be able to support staff. So I think in doing that and advertising that fact shows that businesses are open to supporting of staff, both victims but also perpetrators or people that think that they may have an issue. Again, how to tackle the two.
Now, you mentioned these half-day training events for employers, which are happening later this month in partnership with Cumbria Chamber of Commerce. First of these is at Barrow Police Station on Monday, November 26th, starting 1 p.m. Then there's one at Allerdale House in Workington. That's on Tuesday, November 27th, starting 9:30 a.m. And the third one is in Carlisle at Cumbria House, which is the County Council's headquarters on Butchergate. That's Thursday, November 29th, also a 9:30 a.m. start. Why should businesses come along to these?
I think it's a great opportunity for us to tackle the issue of domestic abuse in Cumbria, for it not to be tolerated, and for us to collectively have a response within our communities to it. We raise the awareness, we offer the support to people that suffer, and this is not only victims but people that are potentially on the periphery or have friends, relatives and loved ones that suffer, so that we can get people the relevant information to make informed decisions and have happier and healthier lives, so that we don't have people that are harmed, at risk or are suffering. Okay.
Now, if you'd like to attend any of these sessions, email Vicki. The email address is vicky.ellis, that's VICKI.ELLIS, at cumbria.police.uk. For businesses that can't make these events, are there any other sources of help or information that they can access?
There will be things on our website that they can obviously access. If they can't, I would welcome an email from people, because what I'm looking to do is expanding this out to all businesses. So the wider I can get my messages, the better, because we then have a wider community response. I'm part of the Employers Initiative Against Domestic Abuse, which is a national group of businesses that have come together. So there are some quite significant businesses there, Vodafone, some of your big financial companies that actually have a response to domestic abuse. So what I would like is that Cumbria as a collective have a response and a place in that forum.
Okay, thanks very much, Vicki, and good luck with the campaign.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cumbria Chamber of Commerce podcast. You can find out more about how we're supporting Cumbrian businesses at cumbriachamber.co.uk and cumbriagrowthhub.co.uk. In the meantime, thank you very much for listening, and we'll have another episode for you next week.